السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. We were explaining how earlier scholars used the term matrūk to describe those who would actually fabricate. So they used the word matrūk for those who clearly lied in hadith. And that totally contradicts what Ibn Hajar rahmallah just mentioned here. So we find that later scholars also accepted this terminology from them, and they also used the word matrūk for those who would narrate fabrications. Like when you were reading Jami' al-Tahsil, you remember that when you came across Ziyad bin Maymun, then you found that Alama Alai rahmallah said, Ziyad ibn Maymun, ahadu du'afai al-matrukin. So he's calling him matrukin. Thereafter what he says, innahu kadhabun wada'a ahadith kathira. So can you see, he says that he found this here is copying Ibn Abi Hatim rahimahullah. So he's saying, calling him matruk, but clearly mentioning that he fabricated. Likewise, with regards to Nufay' bin Ḥadīth, he was famously known as Abu Dawud al-A'ma. Alama Alai rahmallah mentioned with regards to him, kadhabun matruk. But this year, so he's basically was a beggar, and thereafter he decided he'll come and he'll start to narrate hadith, and in that way he'll generate funds. So Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, Yahya bin Ma'in rahimahullah clearly said that yada'u laysa bishay, he fabricates a hadith. So interestingly, Ibn Hajar rahimahullah himself in Taqrib al-Tahdhib, knowing his condition that he would fabricate hadith, Ibn Hajar rahimahullah said that he is matruk. Likewise, there are so many other places where Ibn Hajar rahimahullah himself did not use the word matruk to only describe a narration who is accused of lying. So to mention whatever random stuffs here, you find in Taqrib al-Tahdhib, when he was explaining the various stages of narrators, then he explained the 10th is al-ashira man lam yuwathaq al-batta. And thereafter he says, وَإِلَيْهِ الْإِشَارَةِ بِمَتْرُوكٍ أو مَتْرُوكِ الْحَدِيثِ. That a person who no one has ever regarded as authentic. So he's saying such a person, I will refer to him as matruk. And then he refers to the 11th and he says, manitu him bil kadhib. So you can see here that he himself is creating a distinction. And then if you go to Mizan al-I'tidal of Imam Zahabi rahmallah, you find that he also put the word matruk in a different category. So he said, وَأَرْضَوْ عِبَارَاتِ الْجَرْحِ, the worst jarh you can give a person, the worst words you can use on a person is to call him dajjal, kadhab, wadda'. So that's the worst. Thereafter, ثُمَّ مُتَّهَمُ بِالْكَذِبِ. So that's the second. And so it's muttaham bil kadhib wa muttafaq ala tarkihi. So you can see he's putting muttaham bil kadhib and muttafaq ala tarkihi. And thereafter, as a separate category, he's saying thumma matruk. You know what the word thumma comes for tarahi, isn't you learned all of that? So it's separate, it's not the same. Likewise, in Lisanul Mizan, Ibn Hajar rahmallah, he just followed Imam Zahabi rahmallah. He didn't put any ta'liq here. He never mentioned anything about it. He kept it in separate categories. And you'll find that he also kept it as muttaham bil kadhib wa muttafaq ala tarkihi thumma matruk. Likewise, the main teacher of Ibn Hajar rahmallah in Usul, Alama Iraqi rahmallah in Taqir wal Idah, he also put them separately. He said, Al-Rabi'am, إذا قالوا متروك الحديث أو ذاهب الحديث أو كذاب فهو ساقط الحديث لا يكتب حديثهم. So you can see in this way here, they created the distinction. But now let's focus on Ibn Hajar rahmallah himself. So we find that Ibn Hajar rahmallah practically when giving grades, because he was a muhaddith, so it's very simple for us to see that 1 year he's telling us what you should call it. But what did he himself call such narrators? So we find how he used the term in Taqrib al-Tahdhib when speaking about one narrator, Ja'far bin Zubair al-Hanafi. Then he says, matrukul hadith wa kana salihan fi nafsihi. That he is matrukul hadith, but he was pious. How can a liar be called pious? Can you say this is a pious liar? So obviously, because matrukul hadith is saying the person who lies. But so then this sentence of his won't make sense, that he's a liar, but he's pious. So obviously, it shows that he could not be lying in day-to-day conversations. So we have to go back and find and inspect. We see that the only reason that he can be called Matrūk is because he lied in Hadith. So Shu'bah said with regards to him, وضع على رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم 400 حديث كذب, that he fabricated himself 400 ahadith. Ibn Hajar is the one who's narrating it from Shu'bah, so he knows that it's true. Likewise, Ibn Hajar quotes other scholars as well, and obviously Ibn Hajar himself is bound to follow these scholars. He's quoting from Ibn Hibban rahmallah that يروي عن القاسم وغيره أشياء موضوعة. Likewise, he narrates from, he quotes from Imam Abu Dawud rahmallah. So you can see that Ibn Hajar knows that he fabricated, yet Ibn Hajar is saying that besides his fabrications, he was a pious person. Because like we done that the Sufis, how they would fabricate. So he did not lie in normal conversations. The reason for calling him Matrūk is because of fabricating a hadith. Likewise, with regards to another narrator, Talha bin Zayd. So there, Ibn Hajar rahimahullah says Matrūk, and after saying Matrūk, again Ibn Hajar is bound to follow previous scholars. He's quoting three main, and all this is mentioned in Taqrīb al-Tahdhīb. So in Taqrīb al-Tahdhīb is saying Matrūk, قال أحمد وعلي وأبو داود كان يضع, that he would fabricate. So see, he's using the word Matrūk for a person who would lie in hadith. Likewise, and then if you have to now, match it, so you go to his profile in Tahdhīb al-Tahdhīb, then you will find there that he's quoting from Imam Ahmad rahmallah saying how he would fabricate. Likewise, Imam Bukhari and Imam Nasai calling him Munkar al-Hadith, and Ajuri rahmallah quoting from Imam Abu Dawud that he would also fabricate. So then another narrator. So there's many places, and obviously if you have to, if you know how to use a search engine, I'm sure you will be able to find many more places if you have to put it in. But nevertheless, these are a few random examples. So with regards to Hamza bin Abi Hamza, he says Matrūkun muttahamun bil wada'. So you can see again that he's accused of lying, and therefore he's called Matrūk. So he didn't say muttaham bil kadhib, he's saying muttaham bil wada'. So this is 100% contradicting what he just mentioned here. And we can also do a comparison between his other books. If you have to take, for example, Al-Mutalib al-Aliyah. So Ibn Hajar rahmallah there with regards to Dawud bin al-Mahbar, he just sufficed by saying Matrūk. That's all he said. That he quoted the hadith, and again, just to give you the example to show you that at times in these books they're talking about, so he's actually quoting the hadith of Murruhum bis salati lisab wa wadribuhum alayha. So you can see here it comes wadribuhum alayha li thalathata ashara. So he's saying that Dawood is Matrūk. But yet when you have to go to Taqrīb, you find that so many scholars have said that he was a liar. In fact, not only a liar, Ibn Hajar rahmallah in Taqrīb also admits that he wrote an entire book just with fabrications. And then, actually, one of the greatest proofs which you can use here to show this point is Hafs bin Sulaiman. So, Imam Hafs rahmallah is the primary transmitter of one of the 7 qira'ats of the Quran. 3/4 of the world read according to his transmission. So when you go under his profile in Taqrīb al-Tahdhīb, you will find that, so you're talking here about an imam of qira'at, and who the whole world is almost reading according to his transmission. So can you say that he lied? If he was a liar, can a liar be the one who's transmitting to us how to read the Quran? Yet when you go under his profile in Taqrīb al-Tahdhīb, you will find that Ibn Hajar rahmallah said Matrūkul Hadith ma'a imamatihi fil qira'ah. And that's also, when we discuss Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, inshallah, one day if Allah Ta'ala makes it possible, we will need about 3-4 hours to talk about, in fact more than 4 hours, 5 hours to talk about Imam Abu Hanifa, firstly as a muhaddith, then as a imam, was he an imam in jarh and ta'dil, etc. So you can see at times that a person specialized in another field, so muhaddithun would use this kind of a term. So in that way you can interpret terms which were used for Imam Abu Hanifa rahmallah as well. So here Ibn Hajar is agreeing that he was a imam in qira'ah. But he's saying Matrūkul Ḥadīth. So if you only read Nuzha to an-Naḍar and you had to look at this here, you would say, what's happening here? That he's a liar. So that means the way we are reading Quran today, rather we must read according to Warsh, because this, how can we follow a liar? But obviously, this here means that in Hadith, because his speciality was not Hadith, so his speciality was Qira'ah. So therefore, in Hadith, maybe at times he would quote a Hadith which were, or you can take the other meaning where Ibn Hajar Rahimahullah mentioned that no one regarded him as a reliable narrator because this was not his field. So this can clearly show you that the word Matrūkul Hadith is not used for a person who would lie in his general conversations. Then Ibn Hajar Rahimahullah also used the word in another context. So to show you now the contrary, that Ibn Hajar Rahimahullah used the term even for those who were not known to lie and whose weakness was inferior. So for example, under the profile of Amir bin Salih, he says Matrūkul Ḥadīth. So now what's the meaning of Matrūkul Ḥadīth? It would mean that the person who is accused of lying. But look what he says after that. He's saying Matrūkul Ḥadīth, أفرط فيه ابن معين فكذبه. He's only Matrūkul Ḥadīth. Ibn Ma'in went to extremes and said that he's a liar. So obviously, that shows you that there's a difference between a liar and someone who is Matrūkul Ḥadīth. He's only Matrūkul Ḥadīth. Ibn Ma'in went to extremes and regarded him as a liar. So you can see here he's using the word Matrūkul Ḥadīth for someone who is not a liar. Likewise, there are many times when you can now understand that he's actually making a distinction between those who would lie and those who are matrūk. So for example, under the tarjuma of Ata bin Ajlan, he says matrūk. So matrūk, it would mean that he would normally lie in his day-to-day conversations. But then after that, he's saying bal, and you know bal, it comes the meaning of bal. So that means he's only matrūk. بل أطلق عليه ابن معين والفلاس وغيرهما الكذب. So you can see he's matrūk, but some would say that he would lie. Likewise, so there's many examples like this here from Amara bin Juwayn. Again, the same thing, that matrūkun ومنهم من كذبه, that he is a matrūk, but there were others who would even regard him as a liar. That shows you that there is a distinction between a normal liar, a person who is just mutaham bil kadhib in his normal day-to-day conversations, and between a matrūk. Ibn Hajar Rahimahullah is clearly making this distinction. Now, going back to the point which we mentioned previously, that earlier scholars would always use the word matrūk to describe a narrator. They very seldom used it to describe a narration. They use it to describe a human being and not the text of the hadith. Whereas Ibn Hajar Rahimahullah, the way he's mentioning it here is as a description for the narration. Look at his words. وَالْقِسْمُ الثَّانِي مِنْ أَقْسَامِ الْمَرْدُودِ هُوَ مَا يَكُونُ بِسَبَبِ تُهْمَةِ الرَّاوِي بِالْكَذِبِ. So what is the fa'il of the word yakunu? The text of the hadith is because where the liar is accused, the rawi is accused of lying. So when we try to look if there were scholars before Ibn Hajar Rahimahullah who used the term matrūk for the narration, because all these examples it was used for the narrator. So we find that Ibn Dihya al-Kalbi, so he passed away in the year 633 AH. So he used the term for a narration, but then he used it in a very different meaning. So he brings in his kitab أداء ما وجب من بيان وضع الوضاعين في رجب. So he brings about weak narrations. So he's just explaining وهو ما رواه محدث ليس عنده سوى مجرد الرواية ولا يعرف that a person is just known. We know that this person has narrated, but we don't know about his status, etc. So then he says, Ibn Dihya says, وَقَدْ طَالَعْتُ كُتُبَ الْفِقْهِ, and then he says, فَوَجَدْتُ لَا يَحْتَجُّ بِالْحَدِيثِ الْمَتْرُوكِ. So basically, the word matrūk is using it for da'if narrations. So it's quite different from how Ibn Hajar Rahimahullah explained here. Likewise, Qadi Iyāz, he presented a quotation of someone, and that person also described matrūk in a slightly different way, in a much lighter sense actually. So he says, قال البهلول بن راشد أما رأيت أنزع بآية من مالك بن أنس مع معرفته بالصحيح والسقيم والمعمول به من الحديث المتروك. So معمول به من الحديث المتروك, meaning that you can practice on some matruk narrations. But Ibn Hajar rahmallah is here mentioning it one level higher than mawdu'. And mawdu' is the lowest of the low. And he said earlier that ولم يحصل الاعتناء بتمييز أحد القسمين من الآخر لمصلحة اقتضت ذلك وهي ترتيبها على الأشد فالأشد في موجب الرد على سبيل التدلي. So he's mentioning that the word how he's explaining matruk, it's like they're in the dungeons, it's like the extremely low, it has absolutely no value. But here you can see the scholar is using it to show that there were times when matruk could be practiced upon, which shows that it contradicts what Ibn Hajar rahmallah mentioned here, because according to Ibn Hajar's definition here in the context here, it can never be ma'mul bihi, whereas he is mentioning that there are times when it could be ma'mul bihim. Likewise, we find that the teacher of Ibn Hajar rahmallah, Ibn Mulaqqin rahimahullah, in his at-Tadhkirah, some of you might have studied at-Tadhkirah, you can remember there that he explained matruk for a fabrication, and like what we explained earlier, how scholars would use the word matruk for mawdu' narrations. So he says, وَالْمَوْضُوعُ وَهُوَ الْمُخْتَلَقُ الْمَصْنُوعُ وَقَدْ يُلَقَّبُ بِالْمَرْدُودِ وَالْمَتْرُوكِ وَالْبَاطِلِ وَالْمُفَصَّلِ. So you can see he's saying that sometimes fabrication, and this here is now teacher of Ibn Hajar, so someone who was in his time, who passed away when he was in his 20s. So you can see in his time as well, he's saying that sometimes mawdu' fabrications are referred to as matruk. Then one additional point which also could be used to show that the concept of matruk was not very common amongst earlier scholars. So here you remember now Ibn Hajar is saying that al-ashad fal-ashad fi mujib al-rad, but we find that Allama Khattabi rahimahullah in the muqaddimah of Ma'alim al-Sunan, he said فَأَمَّا السَّقِيمُ مِنْهُ فَعَلَى طَبَقَاتٍ, that the worst is شَرُّهَا الْمَوْضُوعُ ثُمَّ الْمَقْلُوبِ. He didn't make any mention of matruk. So the summary of all that we discussed thus far is that scholars before Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, they did not dedicate the word matruk for a person who speaks lies in general, or for a person who is muttaham bil kadhib. They did not dedicate it. So yes, they did use it for such a person, but they did not say that it's only used for such a person. Likewise, Ibn Hajar rahimahullah himself, he also used the term in a different context. So the question then comes about that from where did Ibn Hajar rahimahullah get this meaning? Did he make it up, or was there a scholar before him who mentioned it? So we mentioned that it was never defined like this in the books of Mustalah. But when we go back to earlier books, we find that Qadi Ijāzah rahimahullah in Ikmalul Mu'lim, he used it. But then too, the way he used it is that it incorporates fabrications. So if you have to go through his entire text, it's a very lengthy text. To give you the crux of it, he mentions that وَذَكَرَ مُسْلِمْ عَنْ جَمَاعَةٍ مِنَ الْأَئِمَّةِ, that who are, Imam Muslim narrated from some who are accused of lying. Thereafter he explains that اعلم أن الكاذبين على ضربين, that liars are of two types. ضرب عرف بذلك في حديث النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم, and then he explains all the different types, that ومنهم من لا يضع من الحديث ولكن ربما وضع للمتن الضعيف إسنادا صحيحا مشهورا ومنهم من يقلب الأسانيد. So inshallah when we putting the notes on the website, we put his entire text there. But then after it was sinful آخر من لا يستجيز شيئا من هذا كل في الحديث ولكنه يكذب في حديث الناس. So you can see he's putting the second category as those who would lie in the day-to-day conversation. And actually they when talking about those who would lie in hadith, so he says فَهَؤُلَاءِ كُلُّهُمْ كَذَّابُونَ مُتْرَكُ الْحَدِيث. So he's saying that all of them, they are referred as matrukin. So again, we find that it's used for those who would lie in their normal conversations, who are muttaham bil kadhib, as well as those who would lie in hadith. So no doubt, like we're saying, that it was definitely used also for those who lied in the general conversation. For example, if you have to look in the Ilal al-Hadith of Ibn Abi Hatim, then you will find that he mentions with regards to Abu Salama al-Amili, he says, matrūkul hadith kana yakdhibu. That he is matrūkul hadith because he would lie. So we are not denying that. All we are claiming that it cannot be confined to this. It cannot be that it's separate to mawdu'. Rather, it incorporates a mawdu'. It was used for those who would lie in other conversations as well. And it was used for those from who it was clearly proven that they would lie in the ahadith of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, when we look here in the text of the words of Ibn Hajar, all Ibn Hajar rahmallah is saying, وَالْقِسْمُ الثَّانِي مِنْ أَقْسَامِ الْمَرْدُودِ وَهُوَ مَا يَكُونُ بِسَبَبِ تُهْمَةِ الرَّاوِي بِالْكَذِبِ هُوَ الْمَتْرُوكِ. This is all that he's saying, that a matrūk hadith is there where a person is accused of lying. But now if you have to go to the footnotes, you will see Shaykh Nuruddin Qitr is saying, هُوَ الْحَدِيثُ الَّذِي يَرْوِيهِ مَنْ يُتَّهَمْ بِالْكَذِبِ. So until there it's fine, it explains what Ibn Hajar just said. But now he's coming up with additional things. He's saying, وَلَا يُعْرَفُ ذَلِكَ الْحَدِيثُ إِلَّا مِنْ جِهَتِهِ. So Ibn Hajar didn't mention that. If you are just reading this kitab, Nuzha an-Naḍar, and even if you are reading some commentaries, Ibn Hajar never mentioned it at all. Whether you're reading the commentaries of his students, he didn't mention it in his dars at all. So Shaykh Nuruddin is putting this point, وَلَا يُعْرَفُ ذَلِكَ الْحَدِيثِ إِلَّا مِنْ جِهَتِهِ. And thereafter he's putting a third point, وَيَكُونُ مُخَالِفًا لِلْقَوَاعِدِ الْمَعْلُومَةِ. So obviously Shaykh Nuruddin is not taking this out of his pocket, he's getting this from somewhere. So from where is he getting it? He's getting it from Allama Suyuti rahmallah. Because in Tadrib al-Rawi, Allama Suyuti rahmallah on page 498, he mentions there, بَقِيَ عَلَيْهِ الْمَتْرُوكِ, that Imam Nawawi did not mention about matrūk. Why? Because Ibn Salah did not mention about matrūk, because we have explained that none of them mentioned matrūk before. So he's saying ذكره شيخ الإسلام في النخبة. He's saying that Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Hajar mentioned about matrūk in Nukhbah. Now he's explaining it. So he's saying وَفَسَّرَهُ. Ibn Hajar explained that to us matrūk, or not to us, because obviously he didn't mean. Basically Ibn Hajar explained matrūk بأن يرويه من يتهم بالكذب ولا يعرف ذلك الحديث إلا من جهته ويكون مخالفا للقواعد المعلوفة. So you can see this is what he's explaining. So this the definition which is in the footnotes, Shaykh Nuruddin is actually taking it from Tadrib al-Rawi. So this here now already gives us an idea that there is much more to this definition compared to what Ibn Hajar rahmallah just gave here. So definitely this definition which Ibn Hajar gave is not encompassing at all. So to find out the proper meaning of matrūk, you will actually have to continue with the ibara. So let us continue and now pay attention to this ibara. So look at Ibn Hajar is saying, وَالثَّالِثُ الْمُنْكَرُ عَلَى رَأْيِ مَنْ لَا يَشْتَرِطُ فِي الْمُنْكَرِ قَيْدَ الْمُخَالَفَةِ وَكَذَا الرَّابِعُ وَالْخَامِسُ فَمَنْ فَحُشَ غَلَطُهُ أَوْ كَثُرَتْ غَفْلَتُهُ أَوْ ظَهَرَتْ فِسْقُهُ فَحَدِيثُهُ مُنْكَرٌ. So all of you know Arabic, mashallah, and all of your isti'adad are very well. So look at this text and see what do you understand from this. That you understand that he mentioned the first type is he mentioned that it's mawdu'. Now he mentioned the second type is mentioning that. Look at this third point and see what do you understand from it. So he's saying وَالثَّالِثُ الْمُنْكَرُ عَلَى رَأْيِ مَنْ لَا يَشْتَرِطُ فِي الْمُنْكَرِ كَيْدَ الْمُخَالَفَةِ. The possible meaning which you can get is that he's mentioning here about the thalith. Says, if you go back and you look, what was the thalith and the rabi and the khamis? So thalith is that person who makes frequent mistakes. Then the rabi is that person who is extremely negligent. And khamis is that person who commits major sins or is habitual on minor sins, is a fasiq. So these, so fashul, ghalat, ghafla, and a fisq. If you have to look at this ibara, what would you understand? Based on how the punctuation marks are in the front, it would mean that all these categories fall under munkar. So if you look at this text, let us just translate it as it's here. وَثَالِث الْمُنْكَرُ. The third is munkar ala ra'yi man la yashtaritu fil munkar kayd al-mukhalafa. But it's munkar according to those who do not put the restriction of mukhalafa in munkar. When we were discussing in lesson 53, then we done that earlier scholars, in fact majority of the earlier scholars, they would not define munkar as where a da'if or rawi opposes someone who is authentic. Rather, they would just say that it's tafarrud. So you can see there's no opposition at all. A person is the only person narrating the narration, they would refer to it as munkar. So according to those scholars, the third will be munkar. So what is the third? The third is that person who makes frequent mistakes. وَكَذَا الرَّابِعُ وَالْخَامِسُ. Likewise, if a person is negligent or if a person is a fasiq, his narrations will be considered as a munkar. This is the understanding which you could get when you look at the text. And it's the mutabadir ila dhahn. If you look at Mullah al-Qari rahmallah, he said, وَأَمَّا الْمُنْكَرْ الَّذِي فِي مَا سَبَقَ فِي مُقَابَلَةِ الْمَعْرُوفِ فَإِنَّهُ عَلَى رَأْيِ مَنْ شَرَطَ الْمُخَالَفَةِ وَحَاصِلُهُ أَنَّ مَا يَكُونُ الطَّعْنُ فِيهِ سَبَبُ كَثْرَةِ الْغَلَطِ. That when a person's integrity has been blemished because of many mistakes, لا يكون منكر على ذلك الراوي إلا على رأي من لا يشترط في المنكر مخالفة الثقة للضعيف كما تقدم وأما من يشترط فيه ذلك فلا. So this is he's mentioning that you have to look here, according to Shafi's, they have this whole thing of mafhum al-mukhalafa from Usul Shashi, you remember. So he's saying that those who put the restriction of mukhalafa, according to them, those who do not put this restriction of mukhalafa, so those who define munkar as where a person is the only person narrating the hadith, according to them, all of these will be considered as munkar. A narration which is transmitted by someone who makes a lot of mistakes, likewise a narration which is transmitted by someone who is ghafil, who is extremely negligent, likewise a narration which is transmitted by a fasiq. So now the mafhum al-mukhalif is that the person, those who do put the condition of mukhalafa, according to them, this is not going to be munkar. So Ibn Hajar rahmallah is making a very explicit specification here, that he is specifying that it is munkar only and only according to those who did not stipulate a contradiction in the definition of munkar, and only those who do not stipulate this, they would regard all of these as munkar. And like I was saying, that in lesson 53, we mentioned that it's actually majority, the vast majority, 99% of scholars before Ibn Hajar rahmallah. So that means, according to Ibn Hajar rahmallah, that the meaning of this text is that according to 99% of the scholars before me, the narrations of those who make a lot of mistakes, and the narrations of those who are ghafil, and the narrations of those who are sinners is going to be munkar. But it's not according to me, because according to him, he puts the qaid of mukhalafa. You remember under the chapter of munkar, he said, وَإِن وَقَعَتِ الْمُخَالَفَةُ. So it's clearly, وَإِن وَقَعَتِ الْمُخَالَفَةُ مَعَ ضَعْفٍ فالراجح يقال له المعروف ومقابله يقال له المنكر. So in short, the implication of this text is that these three categories will only be munkar according to all previous scholars, but according to Ibn Hajar, it's not munkar. But then the thing comes about that what will these be called according to Ibn Hajar rahmahullah? Because if you read the text as it is here in the front, it would seem that Ibn Hajar rahmahullah is mentioning that according to others it's called munkar, but according to him, it's not called munkar. But then he's not educating the reader. He's not telling us what to call them. So he's just mentioning that we are not going to call it munkar. The others will call it munkar. But he's not telling us what we are going to call it. So he's leaving the reader in a lurch and is not informing us that what he's going to now call it, because he used the word munkar there when a weak narrator is opposing someone who is more thiqah. So the summary now of the few pages, if you have to take this meaning, it's going to be that from the words وَأَمَّا الطَّعْنُ, the summary is going to be that when a narrator fabricates or attributes the statement of someone else to the Prophet ﷺ, or he puts an authentic sanad with a weak narration, then such a narration is called mawdu'. That's the first thing. The second is when a narrator is accused of lying, then such a narration is called matrūk. Then the third thing, according to, if you have to just read the kitab, is when a narration is transmitted by someone who made a lot of mistakes, or who was negligent, or he was an open sinner, then it is as if Ibn Hajar rahmallah is saying that I cannot tell you what I'm going to call such a narration, but others would refer to such a narration as munkar. So obviously, if you're going to take that kind of a meaning, it's going to mean that there is a big defect in this kitab. So if you assume that Ibn Hajar rahmallah is not from amongst those who put the condition, then there's going to be contradiction, because he clearly did mention under the chapter of munkar that وَإِن وَقَعَتِ الْمُخَالَفَةِ. So according to Ibn Hajar, and we did mention that he is the one who came up, so it's not going to make sense. And furthermore, if you look at this ta'liq of Sheikh Nuruddin Itriya, you will see that he's clearly saying هذا مسلك جديد في استعمال مصطلح منكر غير السابق. And thereafter he's explaining two ways of explaining a munkar, but it doesn't make sense. You'll see Sheikh Rahili also refuted him. So we will have to dissect this here more, and we will have to look at how this ibara can make sense. Inshallah, we will do that on the next lesson on Thursday. Until then, jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.